Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. This week, I am doing a solo episode for you, and I spent a long time thinking about what should I talk about. And in the end, I landed on this topic around goals and my reflections on my own process of goal setting and how maybe taking a more flexible approach to a goal setting could be really helpful in staying the course over a longer time. And we're also now, at the time of recording, at the end of January, or we're heading that way anyway. And this is a typical time that when people have started off really strong at the beginning of the year and gone gung-ho and you feel really motivated, it's a new year and everything feels fresh and exciting, that some of that motivation starts to wane. And what do we do then? Like, how do we come back to it if there's something we want to work on over time? And I also wanted to share with you something that I learned when I went to a local networking group and a talk the other week talking about habit changes and in relation to wellness, because there was a couple of kind of tips that I picked up from that I hadn't really thought about. And that said, I do sometimes find that this kind of endless pursuit of self-improvement and self-development and just trying to, like, the message that we always have to get better and more productive and smarter and more efficient, and even like besides the message that we have to continuously try to change our bodies and fix our bodies or work on our mental health, and like it can feel quite relentless, and sometimes it can also feel like it's difficult to keep up, or maybe your body or your health doesn't want to conform to that and it just leaves us feel like a failure. Whereas I think if we can pare it back to the very basic question of how can I take care of myself right now, it might give us much more space to respond in a way that is unique to our own needs at that very specific moment in time. Because things are always changing, right? And what I need today might be very different from what I need tomorrow. And I feel sometimes when we can think about things in this way of being more open and responsive rather than pushing towards this very specific goal that I've set myself, that this is what I have to do, or this is what I have to do to achieve what I want. I feel, and this is just my personal sense of it, is that it can just make it feel really rigid. And then if we have to stop or deviate or we get a bit lost in our path for whatever reason, it just sets us up for this sense of I failed, rather than being like, oh, right, maybe this goal that I had set myself wasn't really aligned with what I wanted, or maybe, life happened and I had to attend to lots of other things before I could come back to attend to, these actions that I do want to implement and that I do feel are useful. To give you an example of what this has looked for me in the past, when I was deep in my own dieting, binge eating, restrictive kind of journey, I had tons of diet books, tons of them. I actually discovered them back at my dad's place when I was there about 2 years ago. I'm cleaning out some stuff, and there was like a whole box of books. And even though I haven't actually lived there for over 20 years, these were books that I had accumulated about almost 20 years when I lived in Australia, and I shipped them all back. I paid money to ship all these books back to my dad's house in Sweden. Anyway, what used to happen is I'd buy a diet book, and even the plan might actually include lots of foods that I liked eating, but there was always different types of breakfasts for every day. Have you ever noticed that? Sometimes it's like every day has different foods and different meals and different snacks, and it's too much variety, and you just like, I tend to eat mostly the same types of breakfasts most days, and I don't think I'm very unique in that. So what tended to happen was I could never stick to it. I don't know if I ever finished an actual diet to whatever it was, like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks. I don't think I ever got to the end of it, to be honest, because I just couldn't stick to, beyond maybe 5 or 10 days. And then I was like, something happened, or I couldn't eat. I didn't have the breakfast that they recommended. And then maybe I was hungry and I ended up eating, something that was off plan. And then I got, well, the plan is broken. So, I'll have all the other foods that are off plan now while I kind of screwed up my day anyway. And I'll get back onto it tomorrow. And sometimes I would get back to it tomorrow, and sometimes I wouldn't. I'll just keep binging for a while, and then I'll just keep going back to, I'll try to find another plan that might fit better. And I think I noticed when I now set my intention for wanting to move my body a bit more this year, that some of that really old mentality kind of can be there. But I also noticed that the work and the reflections and curiosity that I brought to this pattern over the year is starting to, pay off. Because what I did notice was that I started off really well. I was doing the types of movements that I said I wanted to do. I was going out for walks when the weather was allowing it, and when it was lovely and sunny, and really enjoying it. I was going into the pool for my swims, and I was doing the amount of lengths in the pool that I kind of had set up for myself, feeling really chuffed and smug, and it's like, this is going really well, and I think I can actually keep to this now this time around, and it's going to be all fine. And then what happened? I was feeling a bit unwell, and my energy levels really plummeted. And I just felt that what I really needed was to step back a bit and to give some space for rest. I didn't feel like that I had the energy that I needed, or that I'd had the previous weeks to do the type of movements at the level that I had been doing. And what's so interesting is that when those things have happened in the past, I really felt like such a failure for not being able to be consistent and sticking with it, because I think I really hold a deep belief about myself that I'm not very consistent. I'm not a very consistent person, and it's just not who I am, and I just can't do that. And maybe that's true, and maybe it's great if we can be consistent, but do we look at the consistency in a very short space of time, like a few weeks or a couple of days, or do we look at consistency over a much longer time span, like months and even years? And I think if we're broadening our vision and we're looking at things like consistency over the space of months and even years, then we need to be bringing in some sense of flexibility there, because that kind of rigidity is really, really difficult to stick to. Of course, depending on what it is, but on how it serves you, but like over long term, because life itself is always in some kind of flux. Sometimes it's in chaos, but sometimes it's in, it's always in a low level of flux. Things are changing. The seasons are changing. Our bodies are changing. Our energy needs are changing. And in order to be consistent over a longer arching time, I think the practice of trying to meet ourselves where we're at becomes so much more important, because that is what I believe is going to give us like the the actual forward momentum that we are craving. If we are become very rigid, it just actually technically keeps us stuck, even though that might feel counterintuitive. But back to my story, what happened with my movement was that I just didn't go to the pool for all of that week. I went out for some short walks and I was feeling like my energy was feeling really low. And the difference now is that I was much better to be okay with giving myself a break. When my energy levels started to return a bit, like they did the other day, I went back to the pool and I was able to swim and I felt quite good, and I decided I'm not going to do that amount that I typically set myself as a target. I'll do half of that, and then I did a little bit more, and I said, look, I'm going to stop here rather than keep pushing through, because I still felt that my energy levels weren't quite up to what they have been previous. And by doing that, and by allowing myself the space, and then to come back to the practice again, I feel like it gave me confidence that I can actually keep returning. That if I need to take a break from whatever I'm doing, because my body tells me so, or circumstances are changing, and it just gives me the confidence to return to the intention of the practice of moving my body, because it's important enough. But when I remove the sense of judgment and failure for having to take a break, it feels like there's more space then to return, because I didn't do anything wrong. I was actually trying to meet my need when my needs changed. And if we think about that with food, like what would that look like when we think about this in relationship to food? So if your intentions are that you want to eat maybe a wider variety of food, for example, you want to bring in some new types of foods, or trying some, widen the variety of the types of fruit and vegetables you eat, or something along those lines. If you have a week where, your life is so full and you find yourself reverting to easy cook meals, prefab, fridge, freezer, partly ready stuff just to make ease in your life, and because time is such a big constraint, that doesn't mean that you can't keep returning to your intention of trying new things. It might just be in that particular moment of time, this is the kindest thing you can do, because in the end of the day, fed is always best. Trying to be like that bit more flexible gives us space, I think, to be changing things over time, but it's so much more subtle than when we are going gung-ho into very specific, targeted, actionable steps, and life gets in the way, so then we can't stick to it because, oh well, that didn't work for me, so I won't ever bother with that again. Whereas I'm like, okay, that way didn't work, but I still want to do this thing of whatever it is, eating more variety, or moving your body, or finding time for my creativity, or you name it. It's important enough to figure out, okay, that didn't work. Is there something else that could work? Or do I need to prioritize differently? And if we can bring this sense of curiosity into this exploration, I feel like it gives more space and more dynamic to be receptive, to adapt as our life around us might be changing. Sometimes it's stuff we have control over, sometimes it's not. And sometimes we need to take a break even from the intentions and these great intentions we had, because life throws us curveballs that are, that are urgent and that needs, that we need to tend to, and we might just need to drop something for a while. And can we be okay with that? And it feels like for me that being okay with sometimes having to pause something, or sometimes things taking a backseat for a while because other things are more pressing, if we can be okay with that, it might give us more space to come back then to the other things that we also really value and that we want to do when times allow, or it's easier to maybe to figure out where can I fit this in because it is important, and continue to reevaluate what we need to do in order to do these things. So those are some of my reflective thoughts around, my personal relationship with goal setting. I've had a really difficult time with things like the word discipline and being disciplined, which also means, I think, being really consistent, which is not, I think, the same thing as being congruent, because I try to be congruent, and if I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. Though I think sometimes my partner might disagree about some of my timekeeping in our relationship. And that's probably something I have to examine and maybe work on if I want to change. So I wanted to tell you something that I learned from this workshop that I went to last week around habit changings. And some of the typical things that I just mentioned for me came up. It's like, I'm never consistent, so I'm never be able to change habits, or it's just too difficult, and I don't like I don't like the word discipline. But one of the things that she said, this woman who gave the talk, was when we want to change habits. So if there is something we're doing that we want to not do anymore, do less of, and try to break that habit, then she said we need to add some friction to it. So some of the suggestions of habits that people wanted to break in the room was, one person said, I really want to stop scrolling on my phone as much. And that is definitely something that I can personally relate to. So the speaker then said, look, how can you add friction to that? And some of the suggestions was, and this was particular in relationship to social media, was to maybe take the social media apps off the phone and only use them when they're on the computer, or only have them on the phone available for certain days of the week, or taking, setting these blocks on the apps and stuff like that. And I've tried all of those, and I think for me, what works the best is to have the apps off the phone and just use them on the computer when I'm on the computer. So adding friction. And another thing was that, she wanted to stop using the phone first thing in the morning. Again, something I can relate to. And it would be like not having it in the bedroom, putting it like out of sight first thing in the morning. So just adding a bit more friction. And I do think it works. And it takes consistent action to try to do that. And I know when I fall into the habits of picking up my phone, I don't have it in my bedroom anymore. I took that out some years ago, and that's been really good. But I still get up. I do something, and I pick up my phone and I check emails, like before I've had breakfast, before I've done anything. Do you know what? I feel kind of like maybe it isn't a habit I really want to break, and maybe that's the problem. I'm not that interested in or invested in trying to break that habit. And I think just owning that makes me then think about it some more. Why don't I want to break it? And maybe there's much more to uncover there. But the other thing, the flip side of that is then if you want to establish a new habit, would be to make it as easy as possible. So one of the suggestions, again, that came up in the room was this person wanted to try to go for a walk every day. And again, what she said was, like, if your intention is, for example, to move your body every day, just make it really small. It might be like, okay, my intention is to move my body, and they could be 5 minutes, it could be 15 minutes, it could be 50 minutes, it could be 5 hours. So the length of time doesn't really matter, it's the action. So this person said that in order to try to move their body and go for a walk, they have their trainers or runners next to the front door. So it's easy to just put them on and go out, and they're just there as a visual kind of prompt. And they also said, look, I put on my yoga tights or my athletics wear, even though I'm working in front of the computer, so that I'm kind of half dressed for the job anyway. And that's been working quite well for them. And another thing that she said, again, to establish a new habit is to tie it to something that you're already doing. And one of the things that I want to share with you that really stuck out for me was Again, in relation to sort of getting up when we're sitting, was that one of her clients had found that when you're on a Zoom call and you press the end call button, or the call is ended, that in itself was the prompt to get up and move around, or even just get up off the seat and have a stretch. And that is something that I have been trying to implement for the last few days while I'm remembering to do it. And I can see that is actually something that I like to do and that I want to do, and that I would keep coming back to try to remember to do that as a practice. Because again, I think it aligns with the values that I have currently of wanting to move my body more. Whereas this other thing of like not checking my emails first thing in the morning, do you know what? I'm not quite as invested in changing that habit right now. But overall, I think whether it's goal setting, whether it's trying to break a habit, a new habit, giving yourself space and to come back to the question of, cultivating this attunement with your body and asking the questions, what do I need right now? And how does that make me feel? And sometimes it's hard. And sometimes we have to try something out, I think. If I'm feeling like, what do I need right now? And that's like, maybe I need food. What kind of food do I want? And sometimes if we're not sure, because if we haven't been very good at listening to our bodies or communicating with our bodies in this way for a long time, this takes practice. It can take weeks and months. And we have to just do a little bit of trial and error. So if I'm not sure if I'm hungry, maybe I will just pick something and I'll eat a few bites and my body's going to tell me more. Because if I'm really hungry, it's going to respond with increasing the hunger. And if I'm not, I'm just going to go, nah, actually that wasn't it. And I think the same when we're questioning, do I need to move my body, or do I actually need a rest? Sometimes you can try it out. Take a rest for 10 minutes and see if that makes it better, or if that changes things, or just go outside for 5 minutes and see, how do you feel? And you're like, no, I actually really need to sit down, or I need to have a nap. Or just by going out, you kind of feel like, do you know what? It's just my brain that's tired. That being out in the sunlight or just feeling some fresh air on my face and inhaling it makes me feel better. You can't go wrong if you're being curious about it. I think where we do set ourselves up for failure is when we are trying to be very rigid, and that we think about that there's a right way and a wrong way. There's so much space to be flexible and, again, to try our best to meet ourselves where we're at and for that to be good enough. That's my conversation and this solo episode for you this week. And if you have any thoughts or comments, please feel free to leave a comment on my Substack post where this podcast also lives, but you might be listening to it on Apple Podcast or Spotify or somewhere like that, or even in the browser. So then do come back to the Substack, and the link is in the show note if you want to leave a comment. And again, as always, thank you for being here, and I see you again soon. Take care. Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.